I'm not a big poster here and mostly stick to my little corners of the internet, but this is something I just need to share. This all happened to me about a year ago, and since then it has completely taken over my life. I hope my message can be spread here, as I'm not sure where else to put it. I'm a student at a small college on the Pacific Coast. I've been aiming for a master's in marine ecology, but due to the college's size, let's just say options for apprenticeship were rather scarce for my field. The marine ecology I was studying mainly focused on the impact that pollution had on the ocean and how this affected local wildlife. So you can imagine my surprise when my professor called me to his desk after class. He told me a group of ecologists approached him looking for students to help with a research project. He explained that I seemed like a good fit. He said I was motivated, had good grades, and took my studies seriously. He explained that he forwarded my email address to them and that I should expect a message by that evening. Sure enough, later that night, an email had arrived in my inbox. Good day, Miss Kern. We've heard from Professor DuPage that you are the top of your class and a highly active advocate for ocean conservation. We humbly invite you to accompany us on an expedition to the North Pacific to observe the effect pollution has on the gyres in the area. This trip will be in 3 weeks' time, so make preparations accordingly. The 3 weeks seemed to drag by until finally the date approached and I packed my bags. Strangely, they only give me the address 2 nights before the day we were supposed to cast off. With my suitcase and food in my trunk, I headed off to the boat docks. It was early, about 6 a.m., and the fog was just beginning to retreat into the shelter of the dark forested hills above the city. As I arrived at the harbor parking lot, I saw 3 men standing beside a silver truck. The shortest of the men, with a white beard, swept back hair and glasses, gave a large sweeping wave as he spotted me. As I pulled into the spot next to them, the other 2 men watched me coldly. "Ah, look at you, so timely." The short-bearded man flashed a smile at me and stuck out his hand. "I'm Dr. Crutchek, but you can just call me Dan." I learned that Dr. Crutchek was a marine ecologist like myself, and was the one who had talked to my professor. He then introduced me to the other 2. "Guys, I'd like you to meet Jennifer Kern." "Just Jen is fine." "Ah, well, I see. Anyway, Jen, this is our Captain Charlie Blake." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Kern." Charlie smiled thinly. Charlie looked like a captain, medium stocky build, a short black beard with some silver peeking through, and a brow that seemed to be in a permanent furrow, his pale blue eyes barely shining through. "And this is Mr. Hayes and Mr. Edwards. They're actually the one who helped finance this operation. Department of the Interior wouldn't have been able to do this without them." "A pleasure, Miss Kern." Mr. Hayes was a tall, skinny man with perfectly combed hair. He had a skinny face and what can best be described as a resting, annoyed face. Mr. Edwards simply nodded. He looked almost identical to Mr. Hayes save a mole on his left cheek. "Well, let's get your luggage on board. We want to be at least 7 miles from the coast within the next 3 hours." Captain Blake helped carry my luggage out to the dock where our vessel awaited. The boat was about the size of a small fishing trawler with a cabin above, a below deck with sleeping bunks, and a small lab room at the back for analysis. On the side of the boat in faded blue font was the name Monsoon. "Before I bought her, she was a mere fishing trawler," explained Dan. "Yeah, I could tell," I said, looking at the rust stains running down the white sides of the cabin from even rustier bolts. Charlie took my bags down to the bunk room. The space was surprisingly roomy, considering the cannon size, and you could stretch your arms wide and still have a foot of space between the walls. With a growl of the old diesel engine, we pulled away from the dock to begin our journey. The sun was just starting to rise above the ocean as we officially entered open water. Our destination, the middle of the North Pacific Gyre. In this gyre is what is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. If garbage makes its way into the Pacific, chances are it'll wind up there. As Dr. Crutchek explained, our mission here will be to assess the effect the garbage mass has had on the local wildlife. Then Mr. Hayes and Mr. Edwards can report back on what can be done. I nodded along to what he said, but kept looking over at the 2 agents. Something about them gave me an upset feeling in my gut. They seemed cold and calculated. Yeah, Charlie seemed tough, but he had a genuine quality to him. The 2 DOI men lacked both of those qualities. We had spent the whole day out at sea, and I can already feel the boredom creeping in. Not even a gaggle of mystery books and old marine biology textbooks could satiate me. According to the captain, we would be arriving within the other reaches of the patch by tomorrow afternoon. Despite it being my first time sleeping on a boat, the waves were gentle enough to lull me to sleep. I was awoken by faint conversation coming from the small kitchenette to the left of the bunk room. I clearly heard Dr. Kritchek's voice and one of the agents. They sounded the damn same. Listen, agent, be reasonable. We're going at the best pace we can. It takes time to truly analyze these areas. Our superiors need a report immediately. Doctor, if we don't, we won't think twice about cutting all funding to your research. Fine, we should be nearing the area soon. I heard Dan stomp up the steps to the main deck. I quietly slipped out of my bunk and got dressed. Due to the cramped quarters, I'd take all the privacy I could get. The thought of being the only woman on a boat of men was still playing at the back of my mind. I got a cup of coffee from the old Keurig machine in the kitchenette before heading up after the doctor. He was leaning against the railing, stewing to himself. I leaned on the deck next to him. I heard you guys talking. Dan looked up, his brow furrowing in concern. Oh, sorry you had to hear that, Jen. He sighed. It's just, I've been trying to do some more research in that area, and now that I have the chance, I have the fucking government breathing down my back. I feel stuck. I put a comforting hand on his shoulder. Well, it sucks they're breathing down your neck. But at least they're showing interest in us, eh? Yeah, Jen, I suppose you're right. While I was trying to keep the doctor upbeat, this just further stoked my suspicions and anger towards the agents aboard with us. I wandered into the cab to see Captain Charlie puzzling over some instruments and then looking to the horizon ahead. The fuck? I asked him what the matter was, and he pointed to his instruments. It was then I noticed that they were all going ballistic, gauge needles flicking to and fro. I'm not sure what's happening. It's like someone is waving a big magnet over the controls. Just as he said that, a huge jolt hit the ship, what sounded like metal against metal scraping from below. The whole boat felt like it jolted up, as if it went over a speed bump. The hell was that? The professor ran into the doorway, holding the frame in case another tremor shook the boat. I don't know, I didn't see anything on the radar. But we'll look at it. Sure enough, the radar seemed to be glitching in and out, almost completing a rotation and then fading out. I've never seen anything like it. Charlie sounded worried, and this worried me. If our captain didn't know what was happening, we were screwed. Something else I noticed was that the sun was getting low on the horizon. Strange, it felt like it was just noon a half hour ago. Well, folks, looks like we're gonna have to stop here for the night. Charlie shrugged his shoulders. I don't want to push forward at all while the instruments are all fuddled, especially since we're losing daylight. It was disappointing to hear, but Dan and I agreed that would be for the best. As I went out on the deck, I saw the two agents quietly talking to each other. I couldn't make out much, but something did stick out to me. Something Zone T. My sleep was rough that night. I kept having dreams about walking through the lab at my school. Shelves lined with specimens in formaldehyde, all of them screaming. When I woke up, it was barely light out. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite place it. As if something was out of place. Looking at the small glass of water by my bedside, I realized what it was. The water was not moving. For the last couple of days, everything on the boat had a constant sway and bob, even at the water's calmest. But that's not the case now. Confused, I made my way to the kitchenette and out the door to the deck. I was surprised to see the captain out on the deck. I paced out onto the deck to ask what was going on. Then I looked for myself. We were no longer on water, but we weren't on land either. As far as the eye could see on all sides was a sprawling landscape made of waste. A flat plain of garbage, and out on that plain, the rusted hulls of ocean freighters lay, like beached whales. Where the fuck are we? I muttered almost to myself. I felt a hand pat my shoulder, and I whirled around to see one of the agents. He was smiling, "Welcome to Zone T." I looked over at the doctor, who looked just as dumbfounded as me. The captain, on the other hand, had a neutral expression on his face. We needed some seasoned marine biologists to assist us in research of this area, but no one who would be missed or have the notoriety to tell. No offense. The doctor's mouth opened and closed as he processed the information, scouring the landscape. This is impossible. Something like this should have shown up on satellites and been recorded long before. How can this place exist? We've made great effort to make sure people don't enter this area, Doctor. And as for satellite imagery, we still don't know why it doesn't show up there. As I wandered aimlessly along the deck, the smell hit me. It was unlike the normal sea smell you imagine. It smelled like pure rot, like the gunk you pull out of a drain when you unclog it. There was a denseness to the air, almost muggy. It's hard to think just hours before we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The captain and the 2 agents were yelling on the other end of the deck. I didn't fucking sign up for this. Listen, you suits. I don't know what you're pulling, but I demand some damned answers. Mr. Edwards regarded him coolly, a faint smirk of contempt crossing his face. Legends have been told of this place for thousands of years. It was considered by various tribes to be the gates of the underworld, or a place so evil the water refused to touch it. But it's not an island. It's a place simply with an absence of water. The hell does that even mean? You've heard of the Bermuda Triangle? Well, this is the real one. We weren't sure if it existed until about 70 years ago. Only through some advanced coordination methods were we able to find it. Why has it been kept secret for so long? I asked. Because people keep disappearing. Things in this place behave strangely, as you can see. He nodded towards the cabin and instruments that were presumably still going haywire. As I said, it doesn't appear on satellite maps and only seems accessible at certain times of the year. Normally the area around it is closely guarded by a periphery of our ships, but they let us through, of course. Dan stepped forward. Then why us? What makes us so special? You're expendable, Hayes smiled thinly. I felt like my intestines punched my stomach. Excuse me? Dan stared agape at the 2 men. If we got the nation's top marine biologists, ecologists, and captains, they'd be missed. We've checked all your records. Most of you are completely alone. Captain Charlie made a dash at Hayes. In an instant, Hayes whirled around, pulling out a 9mm, and shot him in the foot. Charlie cried in agony and tumbled to the floor, clutching his foot. I rushed into the cabin, rummaging through the aging first aid kit to retrieve a pack of gauze. I helped pull Charlie's shoe off to reveal his blood-soaked sock. Fortunately, it had just grazed the top of his foot, but it had still cut deep. Charlie winced as I wrapped the gauze around his foot while Dan held him up. I wanted to yell at the 2 men in suits, but I had a man's safety to focus on, and I was scared shitless. Considering I'm the shut-in nerd that I am, I never thought I would witness someone get shot. Even if you did succeed at overtaking us, we not only have our colleagues surrounding you, you are currently in one of the most uncharted and hostile places on the globe. Hayes loomed over us smugly. We helped Charlie to his feet and hobbled him over to the cabin wall. He glared like a cornered animal at the 2 agents. So what do you want us to do here? Dan said, shifting uncomfortably next to us. When we arranged this mission, we said everything would be provided, and we did not lie. You will find wetsuits, boots, autopsy tools, and preservation containers. You will also be provided with weapons. Dan turned his head to the agents. Weapons. It's just a precaution, Agent Edwards said matter-of-factly. At that point, the place we found ourselves in truly began to sink in. Sure, we were scientists, but to be one of a few people in a place beyond understanding, it genuinely frightened me. Ancient maps with sea monsters at their edges labeled, "There be monsters here," flashed through my head. The agents led us to the back, presenting us with everything you might possibly need in a place in the middle of the ocean that defied the laws of physics. Once we were suited up in our gear, the agents opened up a lockbox with 5 strange-looking devices in them. They were long black poles, about the width of a can, and they had a 2-pronged end that made it look like a spear that a little imp would flail around. These are your weapons. Enough electricity in them to render a rhino unconscious. It should help at least ward off anything that comes your way. Yeah, well, what is it? Charlie asked, limping over to us. The agents remained silent, passing the stun spears to us. Fucking all right then, Charlie grumbled, hobbling back to his folding chair brought from below. Edwards tossed Charlie a cane. You'll be our guard considering your recent incapacitation." Charlie glared up at him but said nothing. The agents unhinged the gangway, and it fell heavily to the floor with a squelching sound. With a grim nod from the agents, we stepped down the gangway and into the wilderness before us. The ground below us was semi-soft and fibery, like we were walking on a giant wicker chair. Parts of rusted shapes and masses of garbage stuck out of the ground, all while a faint rumbling permeated the air. We approached the rusted bow of one ship which was covered in some sort of vine. I took out a scalpel to cut a piece off, and as I did, the vine made a hissing sound and zipped away. With a rumble, the whole mass of vines began moving, like a giant slithering tumbleweed, and it moved like a caterpillar over the bow of the ship, and disappeared into a hole in the ground. "Those things are harmless unless you stay still too long," Edwards remarked emotionlessly. I looked down at the little piece of tendril, wriggling around on its own at our feet. I picked it up gingerly and placed it quickly into one of the sample cases, where it wriggled as if objecting to its imprisonment. The vine reminded me of a certain kind of plant I saw when I was a kid when my family visited my grandma in Georgia. The plant was called kudzu. It grew over anything, choking the life out of other plants. It also grew incredibly fast. This stuff was faster. With a new sense of unease among our group, we kept moving further in. The structures around us seemed to decay further. Some of them didn't even look like any sort of structural design built by man, let alone a boat. Dan and I collected a few more samples before Edwards directed us to head back towards camp. As we approached the boat, I became aware of a strange sound. It was like grinding, but wet, as if someone were running a semi-picked over chicken bone on a picket fence. It wouldn't take long to learn what the noise was. On the deck of the ship was what was left of Captain Charlie. Towering over him was a beast the likes of which I had never seen. Had it not been moving, it looked like something that could never have been alive. Its skin was made of what looked like wet cloth or plastic, stretched raggedly over its frame. Bits of metal stuck out from this covering, acting like its bones. It stood on all fours, made of what looked like harpoons. I happened to look to my left to see a bloodied Agent Hayes, clutching his gun tightly and looking at me desperately. He crept over to me silently. That thing came out of nowhere. He didn't stand a chance. I didn't even have time to get to the radio. It didn't even react to my bullets. It just fucking stared at me. The being turned slightly, making us both crouch down. We ducked behind a rusted piece of metal, seeing the other two a further way off. I was able to see its face. Part of it looked like a shark's skull, the right half of its jaw hanging limp. Most of it was covered in moss, as if it had been around for a long time. I saw what was making the grinding sound. Sticking out of the skull was a rusted and freshly bloodied saw blade, which it was currently using to saw into the captain's face. Quietly, Hayes and I backtracked to the others, only to have my blood run cold as I accidentally kicked a shred of scrap metal that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. The beast spun its head around with a sort of clanking sound, like a roller coaster going up its hill, and although it didn't have visible eyes, I knew it saw us. It dropped what was left of the captain's head, looking now more like a squashed watermelon, and leapt over the deck toward us. "Fucking run for it," Hayes yelled. The beast sprinted forward on its harpoon legs at a terrifying speed, its buzzsaw mouth spinning menacingly. A shrill scream broke out behind us. Against my better judgment, I looked behind me. It was Hayes who screamed. Wrapped around his leg was a black tendril that looked like a steel cable. The cable led to the mouth of the beast, which now seemed to be drooling a black oily substance. Hayes screamed in horror as the beast began reeling him in like a fish on a line. While Edwards and I stared frozen in shock, I saw a blur run between us over to Hayes. With a yell, Dan brought his stunned sword onto the tendril. The beast let out a garbled screech, and the tendril rapidly retracted. Hayes fell away, scrambling backwards as Dan stood his ground. Dan and the beast stood about 10 feet apart, him holding the stun cane in front of him like a lion tamer. The beast seemed confused by this, its blade now twitching back and forth in a way that seemed almost hesitant. Just as it seemed like the beast was ready to turn tail, I heard a clunking sound from somewhere above us. Descending from one of the cliff-like shipwrecks was a giant, spider-like creature. It looked familiar, then I realized it looked like a giant bacteriophage virus. Spider legs, a body like a screw, and a diamond-shaped head. Before we had time to react, it pounced onto Hayes, pinning him with two of its legs. A long hose extended from its middle, and I saw the glint of a long needle at the end. The needle shot down, injecting itself into Hayes' stomach. He howled with pain, and Edwards threw up next to me. After a few agonizing seconds, the giant virus pulled out the needle and toddled its way toward Dan and the beast. Dan quickly ducked out of the way, and the bacteriophage and the beast began fighting, slashing metal limbs at each other. As before, the virus pinned one of the creature's legs and injected it the same way it had Hayes. As I had apparently become the nurse of this operation, I began inspecting Hayes' injury. It was shockingly clean. "How much pain are you feeling?" "I don't know. Not that much, actually." "I feel fine, actually." It was then that he started laughing. Not a good-natured laugh, but a strange, forced, almost pained laugh. "It tickles. It tickles." He began burping loudly, although they sounded more like gasps between his mad cackling. I also noticed his eyes were practically bulging out of their sockets, and then they did. I screamed as his eyeballs ruptured, spraying fluid over me and Edwards. Hayes' laughter turned to screaming as he continued burping. As he burped, long, wriggling silver things came out of his mouth, wriggling down his body and onto the ground like silvery, living shoelaces. He abruptly stopped screaming and gained a peaceful expression on his face. Out of his eye sockets came two thicker versions of the worms slithering out of his mouth. I could see now that most of his visible skin seemed to be wriggling. The worms' heads ballooned into black orbs, and I realized they had effectively become eye stalks. A deep, garbled voice issued from the stained black mouth of the former Agent Hayes. "Your friend is no more, for his body has become our nutrients and outlet." I heard a crash as the beast fell over sideways and began to spasm on the ground. More of the little worms began to crawl out of its joints. It then stood up, eerily calm as if in a trance. "Call your people for backup." Nod Hayes looked over at a mortified Edwards. "I am satiated for now. You may only contact them because I permit it. This is not a land for you. If you stay, you shall become muck as you were all before. Behind every clock are fine-tuned gears, and if you poke into those gears too much, you may get pinched. It is in your nature as scientists to question, but stay back for now. You may retrieve your answer at some point, but not now. Now go." Edward's walkie emitted a high-pitched screeching sound. Nod Hayes scampered away in a way no human's joints should be capable of. The saw-faced creature followed behind, almost like some sort of loyal guardian. I heard a helicopter approaching in the distance. Everything moved super fast from there. I'd like to say Dan Krutchek and I kept in touch, but that would be a lie. I never saw him again. I never really learned what branch of the government was responsible for this. I'm beginning to think it wasn't even the government. I just remember people dressed in tactical gear helping to board the chopper, but not before gathering up our samples and putting them in a steel chest. I remember Dan shooting me a glance as they drove me home from the port when we made landfall. I wish I stayed with him. I've been studying the Pacific ever since, going on to conspiracy sites no self-respecting scientist would ever humor looking at. Eventually I was able to piece together a mosaic of sources. A Polynesian mythology site here, a ship triangulation log there, until I was fairly certain of the coordinates. I was somehow able to convince the school to give me a small grant for my research. I somehow knew if I showed up, whatever those forces that were there wouldn't stop me. As I set about packing my things, I now had one goal. I wished not to stick my fingers in the gears of the world, but become them. I shall become muck as I was before. I'm looking at my arm now as I watch it writhe and twitch. To whoever reads this, let me know, and I'll get you the coordinates. We all deserve to return to the machine, to the muck. Hopefully this is your call.